Hello everybody and welcome to another YouTube video. So in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how we can implement typing biometrics as a form of two-factor authentication for a website, for a sign-in page, or some application where you need to authenticate or log in users. So for this video, I'm teaming up with a company called TypingDNA, and they are providing a completely free API that actually allows you to authenticate users based on the way that they type. So this is super cool. I had an awesome time building this project. I'm really excited to show it to you guys in this video. And again, just to clarify, what we're going to be doing is taking this API here. I'll discuss obviously how the API works and kind of the flow and everything like that. And we're going to be implementing it into a project. So I'm going to show you how you can take a project that has, kind of a standard sign in and sign up form, and then how you can take this API and integrate it with it such that when users sign in, it will actually send a request to the API and see if the user who signed in is the user that they say they are based on their typing biometrics. Now, when I say typing biometrics, I pretty much mean the typing pattern of users signing in. So when they type in their username and password, TypingDNA is going to keep track of their typing pattern. So kind of the sequence of keys that they press and the duration of time between those key presses, that's going to act as the biometrics. It's then going to send that data to the TypingDNA API. The API is going to kind of check that against previous typing patterns it has, and then it's going to tell you whether or not this user is validated and whether or not this typing pattern matched. So this is super cool. I'm really excited to show this to you. And specifically what we're going to do is integrate this into an existing project. So I have a really simple project I've set up. I'm going to demo it to you in just 1 second. This project just has a sign in and sign up form. It has a really simple Flask web server kind of running the website. I'll walk you through the project itself so you have an idea of all of the code that's pre-written, and then I'll show you how we can take this and add it in. So with that said, let's dive in. I'll quickly mention that this tutorial is not for beginners. You should have some familiarity with JavaScript and web development. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to kind of know a little bit about it to be able to follow along. So anyways, I'm going to get into the demo now and show you what we're going to be building. All right, so I've got the website up here. Now, this is actually the finished implementation. This is not the starter project, although the starter project looks almost identical. And again, in the starter project, it has the fully functioning website, except the sign in and sign up forms are not kind of coded out yet, or they're not hooked up to the backend. So we'll have to hook those up to the backend when we actually start working on this. Now, the point of this website was to stay as simple as possible, just to make it really easy and really clear on how we do the implementation. I don't want to confuse you with, a really complex website. Just wanted to spin something up that would be kind of usable and that we could actually test this API with. So you can see here I have a website. I'm using Bootstrap, and this is just standard HTML. I have a home page, a login page, and a sign up page. Now on the sign up page, we'll actually start by just creating an account. So to create an account, I'm going to say tech with Tim. Let's just go with 12@gmail.com. And notice that this little TypingDNA thing here is going up and down, indicating that it's keeping track of my typing pattern. Now, we're not going to have to code this out. This is provided by TypingDNA. We just need to add it to the front end of our website so it can keep track of a user's typing pattern. All right, now that we have that, I'm going to type a password. So I'll go with Tim12345, and then I will press submit. Now, when I do that, it says we need to collect some typing data from you. You may be asked to fill out this form multiple times. So the way that this API works is that you need a certain number of entries or typing patterns so that TypingDNA can actually validate another typing pattern against them. So you need, I think, 3 typing patterns to start. And then as soon as you have 3 typing patterns, you can actually start using the next patterns you send to the API as like authentication patterns rather than, let's say, enrollment patterns or patterns that are going to be validated against. So anyways, I'll talk all about this later on. Just want to give you an idea of why we have to type this multiple times. So techwithtim12@gmail.com, and then Tim12345. I think it was 12 that I used. Okay, we need to collect some typing data from you. You may be asked to fill out this form multiple times. All right, so techwithtim12@gmail.com, and then Tim12345. Okay. Let's submit that. It's going to ask me one more time. And now this time when I type in my username and password, it's actually going to tell me if I am validated. So if this typing pattern matches the patterns that it's collected previously. So techwithtim12@gmail.com, Tim, 12345. Okay, so submit, and notice we get TypingDNA indicated that there was high confidence in your login. So there we go. We are now signed in. That validated us, and this is what I'm going to be showing you how to build. Now, the reason why this is great is because whenever you sign into a website, you're going to have to type in your username and password anyways, right? So this is an extra layer of security that you can add that's fully automated and that doesn't require the user to do anything else that they wouldn't normally have to do. So you no longer need to whip out your phone and type in like a two-factor code, or go to your email and type in that code or anything like that. This is just a really great added security layer that is pretty easy to implement. It's kind of like, why wouldn't you just add it to your website? Now, that said, this should not be used as the primary form of authentication. This obviously can fail if you're typing with one hand, or you're typing really slow, or you're trying to, break the authentication. You will break it. You have to type the same way most of the time when you're typing in your username and password. And if you're like deleting characters and retyping characters, this may fail as well, but most of the time it's going to work. And as I said, it's kind of just like, why wouldn't you add it in? It's super simple, automated, and I just think it's actually really cool. So that is the demo. Now I'm going to show you the starter project, which you're going to need to download to get started. We're then going to create an account with TypingDNA. This account is just so we have access to the API and we can get our API key and API secret. I will then very briefly discuss the flow of our application, so how things are going to be communicating with each other. Then we will jump into the code and start doing this implementation. So there is a GitHub repository down below in the description. In fact, all of the stuff I show you here will be linked down below, as well as timestamps for when I go over certain parts of the implementation. Anyways, what you need to download is this TypingDNA starter code folder. Now, it's a GitHub repository. If you're not familiar with GitHub, all you do is press on code and press download zip. That will download the entire project. And then you will have the finished project, which is just the code I wrote before this video that I'm going to be kind of referencing. And then I have the actual starter code, which just has a very bare bones website that functions, but doesn't really do anything. We need to kind of hook up some different components. So you want to download this folder, or you'll download the entire thing, and then you want to go into this folder, and this is where you can follow along with me as we do the implementation. Now notice here, I also have links to some of the documentation we'll be using, but anyways, go to the description, download this project. That is how we get started. Now, once you've done that, what you're going to want to do is go to the TypingDNA website. Again, link in the description, and you can read through this and kind of see how it works. It's actually interesting. We don't have to use TypingDNA just for logins. We could use it for credit card payments, for just other text that you may be typing in. This is just an example of how you do this specifically for login, but you can use Typing Biometrics for a ton of other stuff. So anyways, you're going to go here, you're going to go to check out our API, now free. You're going to press on that, and it's going to bring you to a page that looks like this. Now, actually, it should probably bring you to a sign up or sign in page. On that page, you're obviously going to create an account, again, totally free. And then you should be brought to some like dashboard like this. Once you're here, you want to pay attention to this API key and this secret. We will be using these later on when we actually communicate with the API. So now that that's all set up, I'm going to walk you through kind of the flow and just a little bit of the documentation for TypingDNA. And then, as I said, we will discuss the starter project and then do the implementation. So the API documentation is linked in the description. It's also really easy to find. You can find it here from like the tutorials page or the API documentation page. And this kind of illustrates how this actually works. So the idea is you're going to have a Typing Biometrics recorder. This is a JavaScript class that's provided by TypingDNA. In fact, this is the file right here, typingdna.js. We're literally going to download this file, bring this into our project, and this is what's going to be kind of sitting on the front end and actually keeping track of what the user is typing and their typing pattern. We're then going to use this class to get the user's typing pattern. We're going to send this typing pattern to the back end of our website. So from the front end, it's going to go to the back end. The back end of our website is going to send a request to the TypingDNA API. There's actually only one endpoint we need to use that automatically knows whether we're verifying or whether we are enrolling new typing patterns. It's called the Auto API. We're going to send that typing pattern, and that's going to send back a response to us that will tell us this pattern was registered, we validated this user, or whatever it is that it needs to tell us. So that is the idea. Then we are going to get that response on our backend. We are going to send that response back to the front end, and then we're going to display to the user whether or not they were validated. Now, of course, you don't have to send this back to the front end. The reason we're doing that is just so we have some visual that tells us, yes, this worked, or no, this didn't work. Now, the idea is when you actually use this in a real world application, you would not allow a user to sign in unless they were validated by TypingDNA. Now, if they were invalidated, you could ask them for another form of two-factor authentication or whatever else you might want to do. So that is kind of the idea and the flow. And again, the API documentation is available in the description. Now, notice that there's a few different ways to use this. So there's same text, any text, and a few other methods that you can use to kind of send typing patterns. So in our case, we're going to be keeping track of the typing pattern of a user's email and password. Now, this is because we want to have the same text the user is typing in, and we're collecting the typing pattern for every single time we're performing like a validation, we're sending that text to the TypingDNA API. But you can see here that it's saying like an average email and password contains 30 characters, and that is enough characters to give us a relatively high accuracy or confidence rate in being able to validate a user. So the more text you have, the better this is going to be. And if we use both the email and the password, that should ideally give us enough text. Now, if you're going like under 15 characters of text, this isn't going to be very accurate. So just keep that in mind. The more text, the better. So you want to use as much information as you can, but you need to ensure that the user's always going to be typing in the same information and sending the same text pattern. Otherwise, you're going to have stuff that's not super accurate. All right, so that is kind of the idea. Now, I guess I should just walk you through the starter code. I have this open in Visual Studio Code. I will show you how to run this project and install the dependencies that you need. So you can see here that I have this website folder. This, again, you would have found just from the GitHub. And right away, there's this requirements.txt file. Now, of course, we're going to need Python installed. We're using Flask, which is a Python backend web framework. And what we're going to do is install Flask and install Flask SQL Alchemy, which we will use for our really simple database that we're going to have that keeps track of users' emails and passwords. So what we need to do is go to some terminal or command prompt, depending on the operating system you're on. And we're going to use pip to install these packages. So you're going to go to your command prompt and you're going to type pip install and then -r, and then this is requirements.txt. Now make sure you're in the correct directory. So you're beside or in the directory where the requirements.txt file is, and you run the command pip install -r requirements.txt, and that should install what you need in your Python interpreter. If for some reason this doesn't work, try pip3 install -r requirements.txt. If that doesn't work for you, try python3 -m pip install -r requirements.txt. If that doesn't work for you, try python -m pip install requirements.txt. And if that doesn't work for you, I have 2 videos in the description, or linked in the description, sorry, that will tell you how to fix this command. So anyways, get Flask installed, get Flask SQL Alchemy installed, and then we're pretty much ready to go. So first of all, to run this project, and let me just close the other instance that I have running on my other screen, what we need to do is go to this main.py file and just run this file. That's literally all you need to do. So from VS Code, I will press the run button. It's going to say, well, no module called Flask. Okay, so I need to just change my Python interpreter. Let me just do this quickly in Visual Studio Code. I think this is the one I want to use. You guys shouldn't have this problem. It's just because I have a ton of Python interpreters. Okay, let me change this again. What's the one I want to use? Let's see if this is the right one. And okay, so when I have the correct Python interpreter that has Flask installed, when you run this, it will say that you go to the following URL. So 127.0.0.1:5000. If you go to that URL in VS Code, I can control click. It will bring you to the website. So that's all you kind of need to know to run the starter code. And you can leave this starter code running while you are actually working on the project. One quick tip here, though. If you have this running and you update any JavaScript, what you need to do is right click if you're in Google Chrome, go to inspect element, and then hard reset and clear the cache. You just need to clear the cache so that it refreshes the JavaScript for the website. Just keep that in mind. If your JavaScript's not working, clear your browser cache, and then that should work for you. Okay, so that is how you run this project. Let me just run you through kind of how this is coded out so that you have an idea of what we're actually going to be doing here. So this is Flask. I have a ton of tutorial series on Flask. If you're unfamiliar with it, you're welcome to watch that. This is not going to be a tutorial on Flask or on Python web frameworks. It's just going to discuss how you implement TypingDNA into a project. So this main.py file says from website import create app. It runs that function, and then it runs our Flask application in debug mode. That's all this is doing. If you go to this website folder, which is in the same directory as main.py, and you go inside of here to the init.py file, this file runs as soon as this folder is imported by another file. So whenever you have __init ___.py, it makes whatever folder it's inside a Python package, which means when you import that package, this file runs. So when we import that, it runs this file. We set up a really basic SQL Alchemy database. This is an SQLite 3 database that's sitting locally on our computer. You can see database.db right here. Then what we do is we create and configure our Flask application. So we say the app is equal to a new Flask instance that uses the name of the file. We then have the configuration variables, so our secret key. This is for encrypting session data. We then have our SQL Alchemy URI, which is the location of our database. We're calling this database.db. We then initialize the database with our application. We then import the two files that are going to contain our endpoints. I'll show those to you in 1 second. We register these two files. And the way this works is we have endpoints. These are like, /home, /authenticate, /login in these two files just to keep things organized. So we just register them with the app. We then import our model. Our model is just going to be what will actually represent our user in our database. We then create the database if it doesn't already exist. So we just check if the database exists. If it does, if it doesn't, we create the database and then we print out created database. We then return app, and what you have to do is do app.run debug equals true to run this application, which happens in main.py, right? So that is kind of the basic flow of starting up the application. Now, if you go inside of views.py and you go inside of auth.py, you'll see we have a few endpoints. So auth.py, we have auth is equal to a Flask blueprint. A blueprint just means this is a file that stores endpoints. It's easy as it is. We register two roots, so /login and /signup, stored in this auth blueprint. Then if you go to init.py, you can see we're registering this blueprint called auth from the auth file. Same thing with views. Views is for views that don't have to deal with authentication. So I have my home view and my typing patterns view. The typing patterns view is the view you see when you need to type in your username and password multiple times to send enough typing data to TypingDNA. So that's what we have there. Models, this stores the model for our user. So we have user, we have an ID, an email, and a password. These are just the fields in the database that we need to store. And then finally, we have our templates folder. Inside of our templates folder, we have a bunch of HTML. I won't really discuss this because, again, this is not a tutorial on HTML. But what I'm doing is loading Bootstrap, which is the CSS framework I'm using. I'm also loading jQuery, which is a JavaScript framework required for Bootstrap. And I'm configuring my index.js file, which is stored in my static folder inside of this website folder. So whenever you have static files, JavaScript being a good example, or images or something like that, you put them inside of a static folder for your Flask project. That's just important. You have to do that. It's just a Flask requirement. And then I'm loading this JavaScript file from what I'm calling my base HTML template. So if you're unfamiliar with Flask, it has a templating language called Jinga, or it renders templates that use a templating language called Jinga, Jinja, I believe. And what you can do is you can create HTML documents that have overridable parts. So notice here I have this block title, and then I'm ending this block. Now this block can be overridden from another HTML file. So I can kind of use all of the HTML here and just change, for example, the title or anything that is defined inside of a block. So this means I can use this web page right here as the base of my entire website. Now notice I also have this block called content. So if I go to say home.html, you can see we override the content block and the title block, and we extend from the base template, and that means it inserts this HTML into that block in the base template and then shows that on the actual web page. Same thing for login, we're overriding the content and the title block, and I have all of the HTML I want to appear in this block on this website. Now this is just a really simple login form. I have a few names for my fields, labels, and all of that, and this uses Bootstrap. Same thing for sign up, same thing for typing patterns. You're welcome to read through this on your own. So that is the idea. Last thing, if I go to views.py, you can see I'm rendering these HTML templates. So when I go to the root /typing patterns, it renders the HTML template stored in the templates folder that is called typingpatterns.html. So that's all I need to walk you through for this starter code. I do apologize if you don't understand a lot of this. Again, this is not a Flask tutorial. You really don't need to understand a ton of this to follow along. If you would like to follow along though, again, on my channel, I have a ton of tutorials on Flask. So with that said, let's start implementing TypingDNA. the first thing that I want to do is actually configure my sign up and my sign in pages so that they are going to actually work. Because right now, if I try to sign in or sign up on my website, so I go to log in or sign up and I press log in, nothing happens. We haven't configured anything, so we need to do that now. So as I was saying, what we need to do is make it so this email and password field, and actually let me just reset this cache here because you can see that TypingDNA logo was popping up, but that was the old JavaScript that was rendering that. I need to reset my cache to see the updated JavaScript for this starter project because previously I was running the finished project and the JavaScript is getting all mixed up. Anyways, what we need to do is make it so when we type in an email or a password, we can create a new user account, or we can sign them in, or we can confirm whether their username or password was correct. So we need to create two endpoints, one endpoint for logging in and one endpoint for signing up. Now, based on the way that we're going to be doing things here, we need to have an API endpoint. So an endpoint that doesn't actually return HTML, but instead returns a response. Like it tells us you signed in successfully, or you couldn't sign in because of this reason. So rather than showing HTML, it's just going to send something back to us that tells us whether or not this login was successful. So the idea is from our front end, from JavaScript actually, we're going to call this API endpoint. The API endpoint is going to return some information to us, and then we'll show that on the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my auth.py file, and I'm going to create two new endpoints here. Now, the first one that I'm going to create is going to be at auth.root, and then here I'm going to say /API/login. Now notice this is different from regular login because regular login will actually show the login page. This is not going to show the login page. It's going to actually, validate or authenticate the user. So what we're going to say is the following: define API_login. And then inside of here, what we are going to do is get data that was sent to us from a API request. So a request is going to be sent to this endpoint, and it's going to send a username and a password. So we need to get that information. So we're going to say data is equal to, and then request, which notice is imported up here, dot, and then this is going to be get_JSON. So the way we're going to be sending this data, it's going to be in JSON format. So we get the JSON from this request, and then we're going to parse the JSON to get the email and the password. So I'm going to say that the email is equal to, and then data dot, and this should be get, and then email. And then I'm going to say that the password is equal to data.get, and this should be password. All right, so now that we have that, what we want to do is we want to check if this password is associated with the correct user, with this email. So I understand if you haven't used Flask before, this might seem a little bit confusing, but when we define a database model, we are using kind of a Flask inheritance structure, or we're inheriting from Flask database model. What this allows us to do is use this database model to actually run queries on the user table. So what we can do is say user is equal to, and then user, which I've imported from the models file here, dot query dot filter by, and then we're going to filter by a column. So a column is just a field stored in the database. So I'm going to say email equals email. So I'm looking for the user object in my database that has the email that this user tried to sign in with. Because keep in mind, this email is what the user typed in. This password is what the user typed in. But this user right here is actually what's stored in the database and what account was created. So it's quite possible that the password they typed in is actually not the correct password. And we need to check that against the password that's stored in this model. So now what I'm going to say is if user, so if there's no user, if this returns nothing to us, that means that a user with this email doesn't exist. So in that situation, we'll say else. And what we're going to do is return a response. So we're going to say return and then make_response. And what this response will do, or what this function will do, is create an HTTP response that will return to the sender, whatever sent this request, some information. Now we need to return JSON here. So I'm going to say JSONify. What JSONify is a function that we've imported. Let me make sure. Yep. From Flask. It will take a Python dictionary and turn it into a JSON object. So we're going to say JSONify, and we're going to say message : and then no user with that email, ! And then for the status code, whenever you send an HTTP request, you send a status code, we'll send 401. I believe 401 stands for unauthorized or bad request. So we're going to send 401 if the user doesn't exist. However, if the user does exist, we need to check if the password we typed in matches with the password the user typed in. So we're going to say if not, and then this is going to be check password underscore hash, and we're going to need to import this function. So the idea here is we're going to store a hash of the user's password in this model. You never want to store plain text passwords. You want to store hashes of them. If you're not familiar with hashes, it's pretty much a one-way function. So a password goes through a hash function. It creates a unique hash. Every single time the same password goes through that hash function, it generates the same hash. But from that hash, it's nearly impossible, at least with our understanding of mathematics and cryptography, to get back to the original password. So that's what a hash is if you're unfamiliar. But I'm going to say from, and I can never pronounce this this name. It's Workzug, some German name or something, .security. You'll have this installed if you installed Flask. And we're going to import two things: generate password hash and check password hash. So what we're going to do is say if not, check password hash, and we're going to compare user.password, which is a hash of the password, to the password that the user typed in when they tried to sign in. So what this is going to do is take the password hash, which is stored in the user object, so user.password. So whatever user has that email, we get their password, and then we pass the actual plain text password. It will hash this password for us, compare it to this here, and tell us if this is true. So if not check password hash, that means that the password was incorrect. So we are going to say return make underscore response, and we're going to say JSONify again, if I spelled JSONify correctly. And I see why this wasn't working. I wasn't spelling it correctly. Okay, so JSONify, and then inside of here, a Python dictionary. We're going to say message colon, and then the message we're going to say is password incorrect, exclamation point, and we're going to send again for the status code 401, because we know that this was like a bad request or it was unauthorized. All right, now finally, in the situation where the user has the correct password and the email exists, we're going to return to them this was successful. They actually, signed in. So we're going to say return like this, and then make underscore response, JSONify. Inside of here, the message is going to be, let's just say login successful. And then the status code is going to be 200 for OK. And we are also going to send some more information. We're going to send something here that I will discuss in a second. It's going to be user underscore ID colon, and then user.typing underscore ID. Now I haven't discussed what this is yet. Just leave it here. I'll come back to it when we do this. But we need to send the ID that's associated with the TypingDNA user account so that we can get the user's typing patterns. I know this is confusing, makes no sense right now. Just throw it in there and we will work on that in 1 second. So now we have this login function done. Now what I want to do is code out the sign up function or the sign up API endpoint. Then once we have that, we're done a lot of the kind of annoying grunt work that we need to do, and then we can actually implement the TypingDNA API. So what I'm going to do now is make another root. I'm going to say @auth.root. This is going to be /API/sign-up. And then what we're going to do here is define API underscore sign underscore up. And actually, I just realized that when we define these roots here, we need to define the method, the HTTP method that's accepted, which is going to be post. So I'm going to say methods equals post up in the root. What this means is we cannot send a GET request to this API or to this endpoint. We only can send POST requests, which is what we want to do because we're posting a sign in or we are posting a sign up. So now from sign up, I'm actually going to copy the entirety of this login function or login root, paste it in here, and we're just going to make some very minor changes. So now what we're going to do, rather than checking if the user's password is correct, we're going to check if this email is already in use. And then if it's not in use, we'll actually create an account for them. But first I realized I made a small mistake here. If you go to user, what I need to do is .first. Now what .first will do is just return to you the first entry that it finds, or I believe none if there was no entry that was found. So when we do a query, we just need to add .first if we want only one entry. Of course, you can query a database table for multiple entries, then you wouldn't use this .first function. But for our purpose, we need to add this. So just tack this on to the end of the query. All right, so now that we have this, what we're going to do, I'm just reading my notes here to make sure this is all good, is make sure that the user's email is valid And when I say valid, that means it doesn't already exist and it is of adequate length. So I'm going to say if user or the len of email is less than 4. So if there's less than 4 characters in their email, we're going to remove this line because we don't need this. And we are going to return a response that says that this email is already in use or email is invalid. Email is invalid, exclamation point. And again, we will send 401 as the response code. Now, if that is not the case, so inside of an else statement here, let me get rid of this. What we want to do is actually create a new user that has this email and has this password and then add it to the database. And we actually want to return information about that user to our front end once we create it. So I'm going to say new underscore user is equal to user, right? We're going to use this user object, which is modeling our users in the database. And we're going to say email is equal to email. We're going to say password is equal to. So here we cannot store the plain text password. We need to store a password hash. So we're going to generate a password hash. So generate password hash. And then what I'm going to do is put the password. And I'm going to say that the method is equal to, and then SHA-256, which is a very popular encryption algorithm or method, whatever you want to call it. So let me just make sure this is good. Looks good. Okay. Password equals that. Method equals that. I think we are good with that. Okay, so now that we've created the new user, what we need to do is actually add this user to the database. So to do that, we have 2 things that we need to write. Now, notice here that I've imported my database from dot. What that means is import from this init.py file right here. I have this variable called db that stores the database instance or like access to the database. So I can use db, and what I can say is db dot, and then I'm going to say session, and not commit, that's the next line, db.session.add, and we're going to add this new user, which is the user object, to our current database session. We're then going to commit this, so db.session.commit, which will actually write it into the database and save it permanently. So now that we have that, that's like pretty much all we need. But what we're going to do is modify this response here so that we also send back one piece of information. This is going to be called user underscore ID. And again, this is going to have new underscore user dot typing underscore ID. Now, again, I'll discuss what this is in a minute. And we're going to send for our response code, not 401, but 201, because 201 stands for created. I think that's correct, at least. So we're going to send that. All should be good now. Okay. So now what I want to do is very slightly modify our database or modify our user model, so that we have now this new field called typing ID, which I've been discussing. So I want to go to models. And I'm going to create a new field here, but let me discuss why we need this by first referencing the TypingDNA documentation. So when you go to TypingDNA documentation, let's go here to where the actual API is. Here we are. So this is the API. So what we're going to do is send a request to this URL right here. Now, our application will have a client secret or an API secret and an API key that we will send along with this request. But what we need to send is an ID of a user along with their typing information. And then TypingDNA handles literally everything. There's only one endpoint we need to send this information to, but we need a unique ID for our user that is different than the ID that is used to represent that user in our system. So what I mean by that is our user has an ID, an email, and a password. We should not use any of those 3 pieces of information for the ID that we send to TypingDNA. So just to be clear here, TypingDNA kind of stores all of our users, right? If I go to my dashboard, you can see it says I have 15 users. These are just ones I was using when I was testing. So these users are associated by their ID. So when we send an ID, that's how it figures out what user we're talking about. But this ID must be unique for TypingDNA. This is just for security purposes. You do not want to have the same ID being used for your internal representation of users and your representation for users for TypingDNA. So what that means is every time we create a new user, we need to generate a unique ID that is going to be unique for that user, different than the ID they have in our system, and then we use that with TypingDNA. That is what the typing ID is that I've been referencing here. Now, notice if you go to Python, for example, this shows you how to actually send the request. It literally gives you everything that you need. So to send the request to TypingDNA, you just copy and paste this code into a file. You have some function that runs the request, and then you just need to pass it the correct typing ID, which is, I believe, TP. Yeah, I think TP is what the typing ID is going to be. And again, we just send this information to the auto endpoint. And that's all for the API. Of course, you need to have this account created first of all. So that's why we need the typing ID or typing whatever. Yeah, typing ID. So let me go to models. What I'm going to do is create a field here. I'm going to call this typing_ID. And this is going to be equal to db.column. It's going to be db.string. This is the type of the column. It's going to be a string ID that has at most 100 characters. I'm going to say that the default is equal to the string of uuid.uuid4. Now, I'm not going to discuss UUID in depth because this is kind of a somewhat complicated topic if you want to understand how this actually works. What this line does is generate a completely unique ID that will never be the same as something else. Just know that that's what it does. You can look up UUID if you want to see how that works, but you import the UUID module and then say string uuid.uuid4, and that will generate an ID for you that will be used as the ID for this column. So when you do default, this means that it's going to automatically default to this random ID. So we don't need to actually, insert an ID when we create this model. It just generates one for us automatically. So that's kind of the idea here. Same thing with this ID here. Since this is the primary key of our database model, it just automatically generates an integer ID for this model or for this user. So now that we have this in here, what we need to do is actually we're done with the auth endpoints, I believe. Let's just see if this actually works now. So we need to hook this up to our front end. So I'm kind of getting a bit ahead of myself. There's a lot of stuff we need to do, so it's hard to discuss or figure out what order we should go in. But we have this sign in and we have this sign up and login page. Now, of course, I need to have my server running. Otherwise, this isn't going to work. So let's go ahead and run this and refresh. But what we want to happen, or what we want to happen, is when we go to sign up, we type in our email and password, we press submit, want to collect this data and send it to our backend so we can then create the user account. So to do that is going to require some JavaScript. Now, while we do this, let's also implement the TypingDNA API and specifically the TypingDNA pattern recorder. So from the API documentation, you can find a link to this page right here, which is the TypingDNA recorder JavaScript file. Now, you can also find this right from my GitHub repository. There's a link. There will be one in the description too. What we need to do is take this file right here from this repository, typingdna.js, and we need to copy the contents of it and bring it into our project. So what I'm going to do is go to the raw of this. I'm going to copy all of this. Now, it's important you go to raw to make sure you don't get any of the GitHub weird indentation. So I pressed on raw, just copied, did Control A, Control C. And then I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to my static folder. I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this typingdna.js. It actually doesn't matter what you call it. And then I'm going to paste all of this in and I'm going to save. So let's go to the top of the file. And we're just going to make one very slight modification to this file. And we're going to say export this function. The reason we need to export this is because we need to import it from another file. I won't discuss all of the JavaScript and how that works, but you just need to export this function so you can import it from another file. So now we can use this TypingDNA function. This is going to return to us what's called a singleton, which is a single instance of a class. And this class will be used to keep track of what a user is typing in the input fields and their typing pattern. So now what we're going to do is import this JavaScript class from our JavaScript file. So we're going to say, and let me just go to my JavaScript file to make sure I don't mess this up, import TypingDNA. And then this is going to be from, and then the name of your file. So typingdna.js. And now we have this JavaScript class imported. Now what we need to do is create an instance of this. So I'm going to say const, and we'll say typing, or you know what, let's do tDNA is equal to new TypingDNA, like that. That's all we need. This will create the recorder. And then what we have to do is tell this typing recorder what input fields it should be recording information for. So I know we're going fairly fast through this, but that's kind of what we need. So we took this file, brought this into our project, and now we're going to actually use this class to record information that users are typing in the input fields. But what I was getting to before is that we need a way to send this information to our backend. So what we're going to do is run a function whenever this sign up button is pressed that will send a request from JavaScript to our Python backend. The Python backend will then return a response, and that's kind of how this is going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const, and we'll start with login, and I'll say login button is equal to, and then document.getElementById, and we're going to get the element called login-button. So if you go to the login page, you can see that we have a button here, and it says login button. We're going to check for the on-click event of this button, and when that button is pressed, we are going to run a function. So let me go back to index.js. So now what I'm going to say is if login button. The reason I need to do this is because this JavaScript class will run for every single one of our HTML files. So if the HTML file that's rendered is not the one that has this login button, we want to make sure we don't crash or have a problem with that. So we just check to see if we actually found the login button first before we do anything. If we found the login button on our page, then what we do is say login button.add event listener. We're going to add the event listener for click, and we're going to use an arrow function. What this is just kind of like a one-line function in JavaScript that's going to call another function, which is going to be called login or sign up, and we're going to pass the Boolean variable true. Now, this function here, login or sign up, is actually going to send the request to our backend. So this is just kind of configuring the the on-press event for the button. Now, what we want to do though is if we are on the login page, if we have a login button, we want to tell this TypingDNA recorder which input boxes it should be recording information for. So we're going to say tDNA.addTarget like that. This is a method that is a part of this class right here. This is from the API documentation. I'm getting this information, and I'm going to add the ID of the fields that I want to collect the typing pattern for. So I want the typing pattern for email, and I want it for password. So we'll say password like that. So we've now added our two typing targets. We have now created the login button on click event listener. And now what we need to do is code out this login or sign up function. But before we do that, I'm going to just code out the event listeners for my other pages. So if we go to sign up, or you know what, we'll just do it here. Sign up also has a button, right? So we need this button. We need to configure that to do something when we press it. And then that typing patterns page I have, let's go this typing patterns. This one has a button as well that we need to configure so that when it's pressed, it calls this function. So what I'm going to do is go to index.js. I'm going to copy all of this. I'm just going to change a few things. So instead of login, instead of login, we're going to say sign up button, and we can just go with a uppercase U2. We're going to change this to sign-up button. And then we're going to change the variable name here to sign up button. And this variable name should be changed as well to sign up button. All right, so now we have an event listener for this. We're going to do the same thing for this function, except now we're going to call false. The reason we're passing false here is because this is going to tell us whether we're logging in or signing up. This function does like the exact same thing. It just has a very minor change if we're logging in or signing up. So we're telling this function whether we're signing up or logging in with this. And then we are going to copy this again and add the same thing for the typing patterns button. So we're going to say typing patterns like that, typing patterns button. Let me copy this, paste this here, and then change this name here. What did I call this button? I think I called this typing-patterns button. You can find this ID here. Yep, okay, it's called typing patterns button. So now that we have our three on event click listeners. So now what I'm going to do is define a function. I'm going to say export function, and then the function name is going to be login or sign up. We're going to take login equal to true. So when we pass false, that means we are not logging in. We are instead signing up. Then what I'm going to do inside of here is I'm going to send a request to our backend that has the appropriate information. So I'm going to start by getting the user's email and getting the user's password. So whenever we call this function, that means we pressed the submit button on one of these pages. We then need to collect their email and their password, which are named by the same field, like the ID of the fields are the exact same. So what we can say is const email equals document.getElementById. This is going to be email, and then this is going to be value. And then we'll say const password is equal to document.getElementById. We're going to get password field, and then we're going to get the value that's stored in there. And I always forget if we need the semicolons or not. I don't think we need them, but for good practice, we will add our semicolons. All right, so now that we have these email and password, we want to send this information to the backend. So we need to first decide what endpoint, what URL are we sending this information to? And we know that, we just coded them out in this auth file. We have the login endpoint and the signup endpoint. And these are the ones that handle the logic of creating a new user or authenticating our user, checking if their password is correct. So what I'm going to do is go to TypingDNA or index.js. I'm going to say let endpoint. And then I'm going to define this endpoint based on if we are logging in or signing up. So if login, then what we're going to say is endpoint is equal to, and then /API /login. Otherwise, so else, we will say that endpoint is equal to, and then this will be /API /sign -up. Let me just make sure that is the correct name. I think it is. So now that we have the endpoint, the email, and the password, all we have to do is send this information to the endpoint. So in JavaScript, there's a method called fetch. So we're going to say fetch, and then we're going to send this to the endpoint. And then we're going to pass some information with this request, namely the method of the request. So is it a post request? Is it a get request? Is it a put request? The headers, so it's the content type that we're sending. And then the body of the request, which is going to be the data, so the email and the password that we want to send. So I'm going to say endpoint method :post. Then I'm going to say headers, and this is going to be colon, and we're going to pass a JSON object. This is going to say content -type, and this is going to be application /JSON. Let me just make sure that's right. Sorry, we have a lowercase a. So application /JSON. I won't really discuss this. This is just what we need to do to send this request properly. And then finally, inside of here, we're going to have the body. So we're going to say body : this is going to be equal to JSON.stringify. And we're going to stringify this object, email : email, and password : password. Now, let me just save and format this. There we go. So now you can actually read this. So we have fetch endpoint, method post, headers, content type, application JSON, and then sorry, this body should not be inside of the headers. This should be right there. So let's format that. Okay, that looks good. All right, so now we have all of the stuff we need to send for our request. We're sending this information to our endpoint, and I think that's good. So now what's going to happen is we're going to send this request. We then want to wait for a response. So we're going to say .then. What this is going to do is run whatever function we define in here as soon as a response is returned. So we're going to say then res equals, and then I guess this is less than sign or greater than sign. I don't know which one you call that. And what we're going to do is just return the res.json. So if you don't, if you only have one line in your function like this in JavaScript, it just automatically returns what you write after this line. So we are getting the JSON from the response, which is what we want. That's going to have the message that we're sending. And then after that, so after this function runs, which will happen immediately, what we want to do is get the data, which will be contained in the response.json. And we're just going to print this out. We're going to say console.log data. So let's run that. Okay, that's all good. So now we have this. And now what's going to happen is when we press these buttons, it's actually going to send the request to our backend. And then our backend, if we go to auth here, is going to return a response to us. We're then going to print out the JSON or the data of that response to the console. Now, the reason we're doing all of this is because we need to make sure that the user is typing in the correct email and password before we send this information off to the TypingDNA API. So once we get this response back that says, hey, this was all good, you know, your typing data, or sorry, not your typing data, your email and your password was proper and this was successful, then we can go ahead and send all of our typing patterns to the API. So it's a lot of work to do this beforehand, but anyways, we do need to do that. So let me refresh this page. Let's actually go to sign up and let's try to create an account. So I'm going to say tim@gmail.com. And for my password, I'll just go tim12345. and I will press submit. Now notice nothing happens here, right? We don't see anything, but if we go to the console, nothing's happening either. I remember we forgot to empty our cache and hard reload for our JavaScript. And what is this saying? Failed to resolve module specifier TypingDNA.js. Relative reference must start with either / or /. So I realized I made a small mistake here. Let's go to index.js. And we see that we need to add / here because we're importing this from the same file. So sorry, my bad on that. Let's go back here. Let's refresh. Failed to resolve. Okay, let's refresh again. And there we go. That's good. Don't worry about this fave icon not found. It doesn't matter for this. But now let's try this. So if I just press submit, notice it says email is invalid. And it tells me I had an unauthorized request because, well, the email was invalid. So now let's type in an email, tim@gmail.com, but let's not put any password. When I submit this, it says no user with that email. Oh, what the heck? Are we sending this to the right? Okay, I think I'm sending this to the wrong thing, or maybe my message is incorrect. Okay, let's go back to the drawing board here because I think I made a small mistake. Let's go to auth.py and let's see what's happening here. I realized I made a mistake here. So first of all, we need to make sure that the user actually types in a password. In this case, we didn't type a password. It actually created a user. The reason we got this response, though, is because I forgot to rename this. This should have said user created, not no user with this email, because, well, there was a user with that email. But before we do this, we need to make sure that the password is valid as well. So I'm just going to do an elif down here. If user, we'll say elif len of password is less than 7, then what I will do is return a response that just says their password is too short. So we'll say password too short. Okay, so glad I caught that issue. That could have been a pretty big deal. So we're making sure that their email is long enough and their password is long enough, and then only then are we creating an account. But anyways, that was working. Let me just rerun this server. We just had the wrong response message. Okay, so let's try this again. Let's refresh. Let's create a new email this time. So tim1@gmail.com. And let's see if this fails when we don't type in a password. So when I press submit, password too short. Awesome. We'll try again. So now I'm going to say tim12345. And there we go. User created. And it gives me the ID of this user. Now this ID is the typing ID, right? The thing that we want to send to TypingDNA. Okay, so now that we have that, that is all good. What we want to do now is see if we can sign in. So let's go to log in and let's see if we can sign in with this account. So Tim, was it 1? I think it was @gmail.com. And then Tim12345, log in successful. Awesome. Now let's type the password wrong. And this says password incorrect. Sweet. So this is indeed working. And yeah, that's awesome. So now that we have that, what we want to do is send this information, this typing pattern, to TypingDNA. We also want to make sure that after a user signs up, it redirects them to a page. The page we want to redirect them to is the typing patterns page because we need to collect more typing patterns from them. So now what I'm going to do is code out a function. This function is going to send the typing data we collected to TypingDNA, but only if the user logged in or signed up successfully. So that's why we needed all this stuff, right? Because we're only going to send the data if the sign in or login was successful to start. There's no point in doing a two-factor authentication if the first factor was not successful, right? So now we're going to make a function. We're going to say function, and this is going to be called send typing data. We're going to take in here an ID and text. Now, what the ID is the ID of our user for TypingDNA. So what I've been returning, right, if I go back here, what I've been returning as the user ID, this is the ID that we want to use for TypingDNA. So that is why I'm sending it back to the front end so that we have access to it, and then we can send it to the back end so the back end knows which user it's going to be dealing with. Anyways, we'll get to it when we get to it. It's hard to explain stuff without the example, but send typing data. So what we're going to do here is say const pattern is equal to tDNA, so TypingDNA, dot get pattern. Now, when we get the pattern, we need to pass in an object here. And this object defines what type of pattern we're looking for and the text that we want the pattern for. So we're going to say type:1 and text:text. Now, let's go to the documentation, and I'll show you how this works. So if I go to the documentation here, let's load this up full screen. And we go and we look for, let's see here, get typing pattern. Okay, perfect. So here it is. TypingDNA.getTypingPattern. I just realized I used the wrong name. Let's go back. Good job, I referenced that. Not get pattern, we want get typing pattern. Okay, so this is the correct function name or method name. So anyways, this is the main function that outputs the user's typing pattern as a string, returns a typing pattern in string form. This is the pattern we want to send to TypingDNA API. Options object, an object of the following form: type, number, text, string, text ID, number, target ID, all of that. So it shows you all of the potential options you can pass here, and it tells you what you should pass based on the application you're using. So 0 for any text pattern, 1 for same text pattern, 2 for extended pattern. So pretty much with TypingDNA, there's 3 different ways you can perform authentication. You have any text. Any text means like doesn't matter what text you type, it will just be able to validate you. So if you typed like a random string the first time you enrolled information with typing data, and then later on you typed another random string, it can compare those 2 typing patterns and still validate you. Now, we're not using any text. We're using same text. So it says recommended in most cases for emails, passwords, phone numbers, credit cards, short text. This is exactly what we're using. Shorter text that is identical, which allows us to have a better accuracy. So this is again for our email and for our password. So we're using type 1 for that reason. Then 2 for extended pattern, most versatile, can replace both any text and same text patterns. Best accuracy, recommended in cases where text is not a secret and is as it records the typed characters as well. Okay, so this you don't want to use for usernames or passwords because, well, the username and password should be kept secret. And this is recording the text that is actually typed, whereas the other ones are not. Okay, then you have text, only for type 1 and type 2, a type string that you want the typing pattern for. Okay, awesome. So since we're using same text, we need to give it the text we want the pattern for. And then the other ones here, we don't need to specify because they're optional. Okay, great. So that's what we have. And it shows you kind of an example of how this works. So let's do this. Let's go back here. And you see this is exactly what we're doing. We'd find type 1, text is equal to text, and we'll pass in here the username plus the password as the text we want the pattern for. Now that we have this, we want to send this information to our backend. So what we're going to say is the following: fetch, and we haven't created this endpoint yet, but we will create it. And we're going to send to / and we'll call this TypingDNA. And then we want some options in here as well. So for the options, we need to define our method. So we'll say method : post. We will then say headers : and this is another object. This is going to be content type application /JSON. Let's just format that so it's easier to read. Okay, and then finally, we want to send the data or the body. So body is equal to, and then this is json.stringify, and we're going to stringify the pattern that we're sending, which is going to be equal to pattern like that. And then finally, the user underscore ID, which will be equal to the ID, which we pass to this function. So this is why we need the typing ID, because we're going to send it to our backend again, so that we know on our backend how we should send this information to TypingDNA. And then of course the pattern is what we're getting from this variable here. All right, then we're going to say .then, and we will do the same thing. So res, and we'll return res.json, and then .then again, and we will say data, and we will console.log. Oops, come on, what is this? What's going on here? Console.log data. Okay, awesome. So I think that is good. Now, of course, we're going to do more than just this. We're going to check the data. We're going to show something on the screen. We're going to redirect the user. But for now, let's test this. So this, obviously, we haven't created this API yet. So we need to create this API. We also need to use this function. So the idea is that after this, after we successfully hit whatever endpoint we send this request to, so login or sign up, we take the typing data and we send it to that endpoint. So we're going to say send typing data, and we're going to send for typing data as the ID. This is going to be the data dot and then user underscore ID. And the text that we're going to send is going to be data, or sorry, not data. This is going to be email plus password. So we're just going to concatenate the email and the password together. That's the text we want the pattern for. So we send that as text, and then the ID is the user ID that was returned to us. However, we can only send that if we got a user ID. So if our login was successful. So what that means is inside of here, I need to make this actually the body of a function. And I'm going to kind of tab down here and say if and this will be data.user_ID. So if data.userid, that means we signed in successfully, because if you go back to auth, we only send a user ID when we created the user or we signed in as that user. So if we have a user ID, we signed in successfully. If we don't have a user ID, this is not good. So we're going to say else if data.message. So if we didn't have an ID, but we have a message, then what we will do now is we will alert that message to the screen. So we'll say alert. This is just that little, kind of crappy pop-up that shows up on the screen, and we will just show the message. So data.message. So now rather than printing it out, it will actually pop up on the screen so we can see it. So now this should actually work, except for this request, because we haven't coded out this endpoint. Let's quickly code out this endpoint just so it returns like an empty response, and then we can go from there. So if we go now to views.py, we're going to create a new view here. I'm going to say and we'll say views.root. And actually, now that I think about it, we should put this in auth, because really like the TypingDNA is going to be a part of authentication. So it makes more sense to go in here. So let's say auth.root. We're just going to call this typing-DNA. And we're going to say define TypingDNA. Let me just go to my notes here to make sure I'm not messing this up too bad. And in fact, just to say consistent, I know I keep changing this around. We're going to go back to views, because in my project that I already have coded out, it's on GitHub, I did this in views. So just to not confuse anyone, we'll just do it in views here. So we'll say views.root TypingDNA. This will be /TypingDNA. And in fact, no hyphen, just TypingDNA. Then TypingDNA, we want to define the method here. So we'll say method is equal to post. Then what we're going to do is collect the data from the response. So data equals response.getJSON. We're then going to get the pattern. So pattern equals data.get, and then the pattern. We're then going to get the user ID, or the typing ID. So we'll say user_ID equals data.get user_ID. And then what we're going to do is now send this information to TypingDNA. But for now, I'm just going to return a response. So I'm going to say return make response JSONify, and then we'll just put inside of here message test, and we'll just go 200 for OK. All right, let me make sure I have all of this imported. I think I do. Okay, so we should be good now. We now have this root. Let me rerun this. Init got an unexpected keyword method. Sorry, this should say methods. My apologies. Let's rerun this. And now we can actually test this out. So again, what we've done is just created a root here called TypingDNA. We are going to get the information from the request. We are then going to send that to TypingDNA. We've not done that yet. We will do that in the next step. Okay, so now let's go to our website. Let's refresh and let's try this. So I'm now on login. So I'm going to say tim1@gmail.com, and then my password, login, and login successful, user ID. Okay, that is good. Let me refresh my JavaScript because I have a feeling that was not working. Let's do this again. So I'm going to say tim1@gmail.com, and then tim12345. And now let's see, it says message test. Okay, awesome. So what happened, let's just run through the flow here, was we go to our JavaScript, we sent the request to our backend, right? We then looked at the request from our backend, and we saw that we had a user ID. So since we had a user ID, we then called the send typing data function. The send typing data function then got the typing pattern. It then sent a request to our backend again to /TypingDNA, and then the response was returned that said test, right? And then we just printed that out. So if you go here to views, message test is what showed up in our console, which means we called, first of all, this login API endpoint. We then called this TypingDNA endpoint. So that is the idea. All right, so let's just try this now with an incorrect password, just to see if we get this message. Password incorrect. Awesome. And this should work from sign in as well. Okay, so now that we have this, what we want to do is send this data to TypingDNA. So let's go to the API documentation, and let's go down to the verification section. Now, I recommend you read through this, but I will just read through the first sentence. The Auto API enrolls all typing patterns it receives for a given typing profile until a minimum initial enrollments value is reached. For Auto, that value is fixed at 3. for an optimal balance of usability and accuracy. Verification results are not performed until a user's typing profile contains at least 3 previous enrollments, before which the enrollment intention is assumed. This requirement ensures that we have collected a reasonable baseline of the user's typing behavior before attempting verification. In practice, this means that the first 3 typing patterns submitted to the Auto API for a given typing profile will be enrolled only, and this is a prerequisite to verifying any future patterns for the user. So then it says, actually, I'll just finish reading it. Why not? Developers have the choice of recording initial enrollment patterns from their end users over time to reduce friction, or collecting all initial enrollments and submitting them at once, delimited by a semicolon. The enrollment process is the same for a single or multiple submission. So we're kind of going to do a combination of what it's saying here. When a user creates a new account, or more specifically, when a user doesn't have enough typing patterns, we're just going to ask them to send more typing patterns. So we're going to send enough, and then this will actually tell us, the response from TypingDNA will tell us if we have enough patterns. And as soon as we have enough patterns, then we will just start verifying. Now, this endpoint handles all this for us. It knows if we have enough patterns. It knows if we're enrolling patterns or if we're verifying, which is really awesome. It means we have to do like very little work. So anyways, we're going to go here. We're going to go to Python, and we're just going to copy all of this code, because this is the code we need to send information to TypingDNA. So we're going to copy all of that. We're going to create a new file in our website folder, and we're going to call this TypingDNA. We'll go TypingDNA.py, and then we will paste this in. And actually, let's keep this lowercase just for consistency. Okay, so TypingDNA.py. Now we're going to modify some of these things. For example, where it says ID, API secret, API key, TP, we need all of those pieces of information. But once we have this, we'll turn this into a function that can send a request. Then what we will do is from this function here, we will call that other function, which will send the information to TypingDNA. It will then get the information from TypingDNA. We'll then send that back to our front end, and then our front end can display that information. So the first thing that we need to do here is we need to get our API key and our API secret from our TypingDNA account. So where it says API key, it's going to copy this, and we're going to paste this into our TypingDNA where it says API key. So API key will be equal to that. Now API secret, we're going to copy the secret. I'm just going to leak mine here because I don't really care if you guys see it. I'm going to close this account after the video anyways. So let's copy this. I'll create a new account to clarify, just because I know you guys, some of you are going to go and try and mess with my account, but let's take this and paste this here. So now we have our key and our secret. It's worth noting, you should not have your API secret in plain text in a code file. Usually you'd want to store this in an environment variable. I'm not going to show that for this tutorial because it just makes it kind of more complicated than it needs to be for this purpose. But just understand, you probably should not have this in plain text. Now ID, this is going to be the ID of the user that we want to send to TypingDNA. So we can delete that because we're actually going to create a function here. We're going to say define send underscore typing underscore data. And as a parameter here, we're going to take the user ID and the pattern that we need to send. And this reminds me, TP actually stands for typing pattern. So TP can be equal to pattern. And then let me just have a look at this. I think this is really all we need to actually send the information. So since we have a user ID and we have a typing pattern, I just need to go in here and find where it uses the ID variable. Okay, so ID is right here. We need to replace this with user ID. And this should be all we need to actually send the typing pattern to TypingDNA. Yes, I think that is good. So last thing I'm going to do here as a modification is instead of printing, I'm going to return the, and that not resbody.decal. We will use that, but I'm going to return instead json.loads, so load s, this. Now, let's import JSON first of all. We need that from here. So what this is going to do is this is going to take the response body. You don't have to understand what all this code does, but essentially it just sends a request to TypingDNA, gets a response. We have the response body. We need to decode it in the form of UTF-8. UTF-8 is just like a text coding. I don't even know how you would describe that. And we're going to decode it. This is going to give us a string. So this will give us just a string. We want to take this string and convert it into a Python dictionary object. To do that, we use json.loads. Load is obviously loading JSON, but we're loading a string. That's what the little s stands for, is load string. And this will parse this string and turn it into a Python dictionary object for us. So then we can return that dictionary object, and then from views.py, we can print it. So from views.py, we're going to call this function. We're going to pass it the user ID and the pattern. Then this function is going to return to us the response from TypingDNA after it sends the request, and then we'll be all good from there. We can then use the information that we get. So we're going to say from here, first of all, let's import this file. So we're going to say from dot, and this is TypingDNA, import send underscore typing underscore pattern. Let me make sure I haven't messed this up too badly. I think this looks good. Okay. So now we have this function. Yes, send typing data, not pattern. Okay, so send typing data. Now inside of here, we're going to say, what should we call this? Response is equal to send typing data. And we're going to pass the user underscore ID and the pattern. Then we will print the response, and we will also return this response from this function. So what we're going to say is JSONify, and now instead of message test, response, and now I can show you what this response actually looks like. So let me rerun this. No module named website.typingDNA. Why am I getting this? Did I put this file in the wrong place? I think I put this in the correct place. From .typingDNA. I've spelt TypingDNA incorrectly. That would be why. Let's spell that correctly. Okay, so now we should be good. Let me rerun this server. Okay, so all is working now. And let's test this. So we're going to print the response here on the back end. We're also going to show it on the front end so we can see if this is working. So let's go to our website. Let's go to sign up, or actually let's go to login. Why not? And now what we're going to do is sign in. So tim@gmail.com, tim12345, login. Now, when I press this, notice it takes a second, and then I get an actual response here. This is the response that came from this function that we just coded out. So let's have a look at what this says. This says action enroll, enrollments 1, message patterns enrolled, not enough patterns for verification, message code 10, status 200, and then it shows you all this information. So if you go to the API documentation, you can now see, let me go full screen here. It should show you what all of this means. So here you can see all of the things that are going to be returned in the response. So firstly, this is the successful response. There's also response codes if there's an error, right? You have like all of these different error codes that could happen. I'm not going to go through them. You're welcome to read through them on your own. But the idea is we're going to have all of these fields. So this just kind of describes what they are. They're really straightforward. I mean, you can read through it and just see exactly what it is. But when you are not simply enrolling, so the first 3 times you send this for each user, it's going to enroll the typing pattern, right? And then once the typing patterns are enrolled, what will happen is it will tell you if there is a high confidence that the pattern you just sent matches the other patterns that were there. So it's just pretty much verifying you. So if you get 1, that means that you have high confidence. If you get 0, you do not. So you would want to use 1 as like a successful 2-factor authentication and 0 as a failure. So we're going to be looking for this high confidence field. We're also going to be looking for the message code. Now let's go to code here. You can see all of the different codes. If you look at 10, it says patterns enrolled, not enough patterns for verification. So if we see this, what we're going to do is ask the user to submit more patterns. So whenever the message code is 10, then we are going to redirect them to that other page, the typing patterns page. And then from there, we're going to ask them to sign in again and again and again until they have enough patterns, and then we will be good to go. So let's go ahead and do this. Again, that was like the documentation that I need to show you. So now that we're actually sending the patterns and everything is all good, we're going to go to our index.js file. And now, since we have all of the information from that response, from our backend, we sent the information to our front end. And just at this point, it's good to clarify, you need to make sure that you send the typing patterns from the back end of your website, not from the front end. This is just a security issue. I think I discussed this at the beginning of the video, but make sure you're not sending like a fetch request from the front end of your website to the TypingDNA API. You have to do what I'm doing instead, send a request to the backend, and then the backend sends it to TypingDNA just so it can't be intercepted. And then we take this information and send it back to the front end. All right, so that was just important to go through. But now in the send typing data function, instead of logging this result, we actually want to look at this result, right? And we want to tell them, first of all, okay, did you have high confidence, or like, was this valid, or do we need more typing patterns? So we're going to say .then data. We can print out the data still if we want to do that. But after that, let's put that inside of here. We want to check if the message code is 10. So we're going to say if data dot message underscore code, and we should always get a message code, is equal to 10. So if it's equal to 10, we don't have enough patterns. We need to enroll more patterns. So we're going to have an alert, and this alert will say we need to collect some typing data from you for two-factor authentication. You may be asked to fill this out, and then multiple times, ... Okay. You can make this say whatever you want, obviously. I'm just going to go with that. So now we alert the user of what we're redirecting them to, and then we're going to redirect them to the typing patterns page where they will be asked to type in more patterns. So the way you do this in JavaScript, you say window.location is equal to, and then I'm going to say /typing-patterns. So this is pretty much the equivalent of a redirect. We're just redirecting them to this page. Now, if the message code is not 10, that means we had enough enrollments. So what we need to check is if the pattern we just sent had high confidence. So we're going to say else, and then we're going to say if data dot, and what is this called? High underscore confidence is equal to 1. That should be 3 equal signs. Then what we want to do, did I spell confidence correctly? Let me check. I think I did. We want to alert them that they had high confidence. If it was not, we want to alert them that it was low confidence. So I'm just going to copy this in to avoid having to type all of this out. But alert, TypingDNA indicated that there was high confidence in your login. Otherwise, else, we're going to say alert, TypingDNA indicated there was low confidence in your login. And now I think that's pretty much all we need. There's 1 or 2 more things. I'm just referencing my notes because there's a lot. I want to make sure I don't mess this up. So after we do this, so if the message code was not 10, right? Then what we want to do is we want to redirect the user back to the home page. So I'm going to say window.location equals /. So this is kind of the equivalent of like them signing in, right? If they signed in successfully, then what we do is we say window.location equals the home page. So it redirects them to the home page, like as if they had signed in. And then finally, at the very bottom of this function, we're going to say tDNA.reset. This is going to reset this singleton class so that if we send another request, it's going to reset the typing pattern. So after we send the typing pattern information and we do all of this stuff here, we want to reset this. And in fact, now that I think about this, we should reset this right after we get a response from this request. Or actually, let's think. Yeah, right after we get a response. Let's do that. So inside of data here, we'll actually say tDNA.reset. We could do it in here or up here. It doesn't really matter. But the reason we're resetting is so that if they send something again from the same page without refreshing, the typing pattern gets cleared. Okay, so just quickly recap. We check if the message code is 10. If the message code is 10, we need more typing information. So we redirect them and alert them that we need to collect typing data. And then from this page, ideally the user will type in or sign in a few more times, enroll more typing patterns. And otherwise, if it's not 10, that means we're all good, hopefully at least. And we're going to check if the high confidence flag is equal to 1. If it's equal to 1, that means we're good. We validated. If it's equal to 0, we are not good. So if it's not equal to 1, we are not good. And then we tell them low confidence. Either way, after whatever happens here, we redirect them to the home page. Now that I'm thinking about this, though, we should probably only redirect them if it's high confidence, right? Because if it's low confidence, we don't want them to be able to sign in. Now, in theory, they can just go to the home page. This is not, a full-fledged website. But this is the idea. So sorry everyone for the abrupt cut here, but I realized while watching this video back when I was editing that I made a pretty big mistake that I definitely need to jump in here and fix. So you can see that what I've been talking about is this data.highConfidence flag. And I've been saying if this high confidence flag gives us a 1, we're all good to go and it is validated. Now this is not true. This high confidence flag, what this actually tells us is how confident the API was in the result that it gave us. So this does not actually tell us the result. This tells us if it is confident that the result that it returned to us is correct. So what we need to do is we need to change this to result, because what we actually get back here in this API data, which I will show you in a second, is we get a result flag as well, or a result key, whatever you want to call it. And if this result key is equal to 1, that means it actually was a match. And if it was equal to 0, that means it's not a match. So if high confidence is equal to 1, that means whatever result is, the API is confident that is correct. However, if high confidence is equal to 0, that means whatever the result is, it's not quite confident that that is actually correct. And that could be based on something like we didn't have enough text, or the pattern, it just wasn't quite sure if it was actually correct. So it's giving you a result, but it's saying I'm not very confident in that result, or I am very confident in this result. So hopefully that's clear. Throughout the rest of this video, you're probably going to see me have high confidence here. So just understand that actually what we want is result, not high confidence. So if you ever see me use high confidence here, just understand that is a mistake. It's just because I'm not going to refilm the entire video because of this one thing right here. So make sure you understand that we are using result, not high confidence, and that high confidence is telling us the level of confidence in the result that we're getting. And result, as I said, if it returns 0, that means there was not a match. We are not authenticated. Whereas if it does return 1, that means there was a match. We are authenticated. So let me just print out the data here. And then I'm going to print out after the data, the data.result, just to show you. So let's remove this, copy that, paste this down here, and then we will show data.result. And then of course here we should probably change this to say, rather than indicated there was a high confidence, we should just say TypingDNA indicated there was a match or something like that, right? Because this is not necessarily correct because we're not actually checking the high confidence flag. So usually you would probably check the high confidence flag in combination with the result flag, because if you had low confidence in the result and the result was 1, maybe you don't want to authenticate the user, but that's kind of up to you. Okay, so now I'm just going to load the website up here. I've just created a new user account just so that I can go through this quickly. And I'll show you now what data returns and what the result actually returns versus high confidence. So the account I made was techwithtim27@gmail.com. And then, oops, my cap box is on. My password is the same thing, techwithtim27@gmail.com. Let's submit this. And let's see what we get. Okay, so there we go. TypingDNA indicated there was high confidence in your login. And you can see, well, I closed out of it, but it was showing me that the result, which is the thing I was printing last, was a 1, which meant we actually had a match. Now, you may notice this website looks a little bit different than what it did before I took the cut in this video. That's just because this is after I finished everything. I'm now on the website again, because this right now is after I've filmed the entire video. But anyways, hopefully that clears it up. Use result, do not use high confidence, although you can, of course, check high confidence, but that is not telling you whether or not there was actually a match. So let's refresh now and reset our JavaScript, and let's see if this works. So empty cache and hard reload. Let's go through the whole process. So let's create an account. I'm going to say techwithtim, let's go 25@gmail.com, and let's go tim12345, and let's press submit. Okay, we need to collect some typing data from you for two-factor authentication. You may be asked to fill this out multiple times. All right, so now we get redirected to this page, right? That's exactly what we wanted. Now we're going to do this again. techwithtim25@gmail.com, and then tim12345. Submit. Email is invalid. Is it? What did I type for the other email? techwithtim25. Okay. Okay, I guess I typed in the email wrong. I don't know if I mistyped it the first time or if that was actually incorrect what it was showing me. Let's try this again though. techwithtim25@gmail.com, and then tim12345, submit. Email is invalid. Okay, so I think we're having a small mistake here. I have a feeling that what's happening is that from the, let's go here, typing patterns button, this is the issue. Sorry, so from the typing patterns button, we need to change this to true. What was happening is that since we were passing false here from the typing patterns button, it was trying to create a new account for us, not sign us in. So obviously the email was invalid because it was already used. So that was the issue we were having. So now this should fix it. When you change it to true, now the endpoint it's going to send to is login, not sign up. Okay, so let's reset here. Let's just go to login and let's do this. So techwithtim25@gmail.com. And then tim12345, log in, and we need to collect some typing data. So notice it says we have 1 enrollment and we need more. So let's go ahead and do this. techwithtim25@gmail.com, and then tim12345, submit. Okay, we need some more typing data. Let's go ahead and do that. techwithtim25@gmail.com, and then tim12345. And this time, there we go. It says we had high confidence. So now we have enough enrollment. And now notice the action is verify enroll, not just enroll. So it did actually enroll this typing data. It's keeping track of all of the typing data from now on, but it's also verifying us this time. And it told us we have high confidence. So that is working. That is good. And then it redirects us to the home page. Awesome. So now let's just go to the login page and let's try this now. So now we have enough enrollments. So we shouldn't be asked to do this again. It should just tell us if we have high or low confidence. So let's do this and let's see. And we have high confidence. Awesome. And then redirect us to the home page. So there we go. That is functioning. Now what I'm going to show you how to do is add those little icons onto the fields here that kind of show that TypingDNA is keeping track of what you're typing in. So this is called the autocomplete disabler, as well as, what is it called in here? There's like a specific name for it. Typing visualizer, sorry, that's what it's called. So what we want to do now is disable the autocomplete on our website, because TypingDNA doesn't work if it just auto fills in the username and password, right? So it makes sense to disable autocomplete when you have this TypingDNA form of authentication, so that like a password manager or something can't fill in the password and then override the two-factor authentication. Although it wouldn't override it, it would just tell you it failed because you didn't actually type in the pattern, and well, there was no typing pattern. So we're gonna use this autocomplete disabler from TypingDNA, again, link in the description, and we're gonna use the typing visualizer as well. So what we want to do is get both the autocomplete disabler and typing visualizer file. So I'm going to go to raw for both of these. I'm going to copy this. This one is the autocomplete disabler. I'm going to create a new file here inside of static called autocomplete and then disabler like that .js. I'm going to paste this inside and go to the very top. I'm going to make one change. We're going to export this function. I say export like that. That's all we need. Now we're going to close this. I'm going to make a new file. I'm going to call this typing visualizer. I think I spelled that right. And well, we need the .js. So let's add .js. Now we're going to go to GitHub. I'm going to go back to this page here. We want to go to typing visualizer now, and we want to copy this. So we'll say raw, copy, and we're going to make one change to this file, the same one we did before. We're just going to export this function so we can access it. So export function. And now I will show you how we can add the typing visualizer as well as the autocomplete disabler. All right, so this part is actually super easy. It's literally like 5 lines of code. Now that we have these files, go to index.js, and at the very top under when we define TypingDNA, we're actually going to go above that. We're going to import the autocomplete disabler. So we're going to say import and then auto, what is this actually called? Autocomplete disabler. Just want to make sure my capitalization is correct. We're going to say from, then / autocomplete disabler .js. So now we have this class imported. Now we're going to use this. So we're going to say const autocomplete disabler is equal to autocomplete disabler. And then inside of here, we're going to pass some options. So this autocomplete disabler actually also handles the typing visualizer. So we need this typing visualizer file because this autocomplete disabler is dependent on this file. And now that I'm thinking of it, this file is probably going to have to be named the same thing. Typing visualizer. Let's see. Maybe not. We'll see if it works. If it doesn't work, we're going to have to change this name to whatever it was on the GitHub. In fact, let's just do it now to be safe. Say typing-visualizer. So the reason I made this change is because I'm pretty sure somewhere in this file, in autocomplete disabler, it imports the typing visualizer. So I just want to make sure the name matches what it would have been on the GitHub repository so that this file doesn't have any mistakes in it. All right, so now we want to pass 2 options inside of here. We want to pass the following: show typing visualizer. This is going to be true. And then we want to show TypingDNA logo. This is going to be equal to true as well. So this is pretty straightforward. This is going to do what it says. We're going to show both the visualizer and the logo. I'll show you what both of those are. If you want to see exactly how this works, just go to the GitHub. There's not really too much documentation because it's really straightforward, and you can read through the usage, but it's like really simple. Then what we're going to do after this is we're going to use the autocomplete disabler. So autocomplete disabler dot disable, and then we want to disable autocomplete. So it's going to be disable auto and then complete like that. And then we're also going to disable copy and paste just to make sure that the user cannot copy and paste stuff into their username and password field. So we're going to say autocomplete disabler dot disable, and then this is going to be copy paste like that. And that should be all we need. So now after we've initialized this, initializing just meaning, creating it. And sorry, this should say new before this. What will happen is we will say, let's show the visualizer, let's show the logo, let's disable autocomplete, let's disable copy and paste. If you didn't want to disable either of these, you just wouldn't have these two lines, and then it would still show the different logos because of the way you've initialized it. So that's literally all we need for the autocomplete disabler and the TypingDNA visualizer. Now, if you go to the website and you reset the cache, you should see the TypingDNA visualizer was not loaded. Okay, so it looks like we got an error. I'm going to look at why this isn't loading, and then I'll be right back. All right, so I found the error, and it's not really an error, but it's just something that I forgot to tell you to do. So the reason why, and let me just show you what's happening. If you look here, we had the TypingDNA visualizer was not loaded. So that meant pretty much that the autocomplete disabler could not find the visualizer. So what we need to do is import it in this file. Now, this is a small mistake that they do need to fix. I actually talked to them about this. Hopefully they will fix this. We just need to include a line here in this file, in autocomplete disabler, which notice I've renamed it now to the same thing it was on the GitHub. We're going to say import, and this is going to be typing visualizer, and this is going to be from, if I can type properly, /typingvisualizer.js. So now what this will do is load the typing visualizer. Since we're importing it from that file, it will actually load the code that we need, and then this shouldn't be a problem anymore. So again, just make sure you have the export in this file as well as in the TypingDNA visualizer file. Make sure you have the export, then go to autocomplete disabler, import, and again, make sure you have the export. Okay, so now let's run this. We've got to reset our cache, and we should see that we get the logo. Awesome. So there we go. Some messages have been moved to the issue panel. Yeah, that's no worries. So this is the TypingDNA logo, right? And I don't think it doesn't do anything if you click on it, but it's just showing you that, hey, if you start typing here, we are going to start keeping track of what you're saying. So you can disable either the logo or this, right? So you can pick if you want to have the logo or if you just want to have the visualizer. So in fact, if I go to index.js and I disable the logo, let's see what we get now. So let's reset. Now, why the logo is still here, eh? Okay, show typing visualizer true, but show logo false. Maybe I have to actually put false here. Let's try putting false. Show TypingDNA logo false. Let's reset the cache. And okay, so now it doesn't show the logo, but it does show the typing pattern. So sorry, you do need to include the option. You just need to explicitly set it to false. Anyways, I want the logo and the visualizer, so I'll leave them both true. But of course, feel free to disable or enable them as you please. Let's reset our cache. And there we go. Now, as I type, it kind of shows that it's keeping track of what I am typing. Okay, so that is pretty much all I had to show you for this tutorial. Now, this is obviously not a fully complete website. The idea was to give you something that actually works, that you could, test out yourself, and to show you how you can use typing biometrics as a form of two-factor authentication. Now, another massive thank you to TypingDNA. They were the ones who sponsored this video. As I said at the beginning, I had the opportunity to work with some of the developers and some of the people at TypingDNA. They're great people, super interested in just making the developer community so much better with products like this. And they were super open to all of my feedback I had. For example, fixing these files, like adding the exports and, adding the imports and making it work better and all of that. But definitely show them some love. Check them out from the link in the description. I assume if you guys followed to this point, you have an account already, but all of the information you need about TypingDNA will be there. Again, you can find all the information about your application from the TypingDNA dashboard, so typingdna.com/clients. All of the API documentation and all of the resources I used will be linked in the description. And just remember that TypingDNA does not only work for login and sign up. You can use it for all kinds of other applications. I would definitely recommend doing a quick read through their website because it's very interesting, the kind of applications they've used it for. So anyways, that is going to conclude this video. I hope you guys found this useful. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in another YouTube video.